Hi, I'm Alison. Welcome to Dream Chasers Adventures in Happiness, where my band of superhero guests and I share with you tales of daring do, life-changing journeys towards living our best lives. If you're after an injection of inspiration and ideas to live the life that you want and deserve, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Hi there, and welcome to the show where we serve up conversation, concepts and belief that it is entirely possible to create what you crave. If there's something stopping you from pursuing happiness, whatever that looks like to you from a career or lifestyle point of view, the stories and insights covered here are designed to help. Now today I am joined by one of my favourite people, my awesome friend Paul Spiers. Now Paul and I met about 10 years ago when we worked together in our old lives, and I've always been massively inspired by his creativity, his thoughtful perspectives and his tenacity. And although he'd probably kind of never describe himself like this, Paul is a serial entrepreneur. He's founded and experimented with different businesses over the years, including a marketing communications agency and a surf clothing brand. Today, he's an insightful and passionate advocate of principled leadership and powerful purpose, working as a global keynote speaker, a conference and panel moderator, and he's the founder and host of the new P&L podcast, which is an internationally respected top 5 business podcast series that covers the intersection of leadership, culture, people, and purpose. Today, we're going to dig into the reality of Paul's entrepreneurial journey, and we're going to talk about how he ignites his creativity to come up with ideas and pivot when necessary, how he finds the tenacity to keep going when, frankly, things are tough, and why it is never too late to act on an idea that you might have had for years. So I'm really excited. Welcome to the show, Paul. Thanks,
Alison. I think you left stupidity out after creativity and tenacity. But thank you. Thank you.
Well, listen, let's start with the ugly truth, right? Like, can we talk about what's the entrepreneurial journey been like for you?
It's probably been incredibly difficult and remarkably inspiring in equal measure, I think. I sometimes get very frustrated at myself that I have the head, the thinking that I do, that I find it very hard to sit in a job and just enjoy the day-to-day, that I've got to be doing entrepreneurial stuff. I've got to be coming up with new ideas and finding purpose and creativity and everything else and innovation. So I'm kind of stuck in a world in my head where I have to be an entrepreneur, although it's sometimes frustrating to be there.
Yeah, it's kind of not for the faint-hearted, right?
No, absolutely.
I think I talked to quite a few people, and obviously a few of my clients are entrepreneurs, and everybody talks about the fact you just got to get totally comfortable with ambiguity, with real highs and real lows, and it's not the easiest choice. Although, like you, I think some people just feel compelled to have to have a go and have to do it.
Yeah, you've got to be, to your point, you've got to be really comfortable in your discomfort. You've got to find a way to accept in many moments within the entrepreneurial journey that it's going to be really uncomfortable, but that is part of the journey. It's not an inhibitor to success. It's part of that road to success, if you like. So I think when you can find peace within yourself, that you find comfort in the discomfort, I think that's one of the keys to entrepreneurship, I think.
Yeah. How long did it take you to kind of get to that point? Because obviously you've been doing this for a while and you've done, we'll talk about different businesses in a minute, but how did you get to that point, or how long did it take you to kind of
Don't know, I'll let you know when I get there. Come back and have a chat in 10 years' time.
So it's a perennial roller coaster, really.
That's the truth of it. It is. Yeah, but I think a lot of that discomfort always comes in entrepreneurship, particularly in small business, from the financial aspect. That's the big challenge, the kind of the cash flow and everything else. I think most entrepreneurs have their purpose pretty much locked in and their vision of where they want to be, but it's often the cash flow and the financial side that that is that big inhibitor. And one of the questions lots of people, I think, in this game ask themselves is, if you won lotto for argument's sake, would you still be doing what you're doing? And if the answer is yes, then the passion is there. It's just how you find a way to bring the commercial element of it to the fore, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a really, really good point. Well, and we might come back to that, but so you've started a number of different businesses, obviously, over time. Can you talk a little bit about where your ideas come from and how you've evolved from one thing to another?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you alluded to in the intro, I've had a few entrepreneurial businesses. I've run various creative communications agencies, marketing agencies that I've established. I had a surf brand for a while, and then the new P&L, Principles and Leadership podcast, and the new P&L Institute, which focuses sort of on research in the leadership and culture area as well. And I think all of them some have come from experience when I've been in an industry, but I think all come from, two core things. Entrepreneurship relies on two core things. That is consistent curiosity, so asking those questions, be curious of all of those things around you and where those dots join and everything else. And then being really alert to serendipity. And we might come on to this later on, but, the new P&L came as a result of serendipity, really. And I think if you have those two core things always in your focus, to continually question and be inquisitive about everything around you and where those dots join and everything else, and if you be alert to that serendipity when you're having conversations with people, when you're reading stuff in whatever format it happens to be, where's the serendipitous moment within it? I often think entrepreneurship and creativity is a bit like, you had those squares when you were kids. They were cubes, and they had lots of different shapes in them, and you'd pick up the triangle and try to, when you're a baby, and you try to get the triangle in a square hole or whatever. I think ideas and entrepreneurship is a little bit like that. You see something out there, you're curious about it, and you pick up a square and you try to fit it in the star, and then you try to fit it in the triangle, and eventually it goes in the square. And in essence, that's what this is all about, is finding those ideas and then massaging them and moulding them till they fit into the right shape.
Yeah. Oh, so I love that analogy. That's brilliant. Actually, we might as well talk about the new P&L. So like you said, so can you explain where that serendipity came from and kind of like how the idea was born?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a marketing agency, as I mentioned earlier, and we were subject to a series of very unethical actions from a client around 13 years ago now. And it took the agency to its knees, and it took me to my knees personally as well, because it had an enormous impact on various other things in my personal life. And at that time, in the middle of all of that, I thought about this idea for a new P&L, that there had to be a better way of doing business than what we had been subjected to, a new P&L based on principles and leadership, not just profit and loss. And I knew that idea had some legs, but I couldn't figure out what the vehicle was to deliver it, and I kept, as I do with lots of things, and we may come on to this, I kept revisiting it and over the years, and then in 2019, where the serendipity comes in, I was having a casual conversation with a mate over lunch, and he mentioned that he was setting up a podcast. And I just thought in that moment, I wonder whether this is the right vehicle for the new P&L, and could this be the format that I need to bring this idea to fruition? So if I hadn't listened with alert serendipity, I would have just listened to him talking about a podcast and walked off and had lunch and finished off. But I dipped my toe in it in 2019, October, with my first podcast, October the 17th, and then it just grew from there, and it grew quite exponentially. So there was a 7-year gap between coming up with the idea and actually launching the podcast. And there's a real, I do workshops around creativity. One of the key points I make is that just because an idea isn't right for right now doesn't mean it is not right forever. Because things change all the time, circumstances, environment, commercial markets, new people come in and look at those ideas with fresh eyes. So we have to keep those ideas, curate those ideas, and revisit them with those fresh sets of eyes. If I'd just given away the new P&L 7 years earlier, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And I love it more than anything I've ever done. But it relied on me to hold that idea, to revisit it, and then look out for something serendipitous that would link the idea and the action together.
That's amazing. So what I really love about this, not just about the holding on to the idea for almost like the right time, which is very hard to do. But then actually the idea itself was born out of something that was quite personally and professionally challenging at the time.
Yes, it was.
So it was born out of a really tough experience that made you think about this, there's a better way to do business. There is a different type of path that can be taken.
Yes.
And so the idea was born out of, and I think a lot of people experience the same thing. In their own entrepreneurial journeys, or kind of in work in general, the best stuff is born out of the hardest challenges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although we might not feel like it actually at the time. So you held on to that idea. You waited for the right kind of moment and the right platform, the kind of right idea to link to it. So you started that podcast back in 2017. So from scratch. Can you talk a little bit about how you built it? Because today it's a top 5 business podcast globally. So it's gone from an idea and I think a lot of people, I'm also quite interested in this from my own personal point of view, podcasting. But how did you do that? What was the journey for that?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify one small point, it's a top 5%, not top 5. I wish it was top 5, but top 5% global podcast. I mean, I don't know. I guess when I started it, I wanted to do it right from the outset. Now, it doesn't mean you can't change things, but I really put a massive amount of effort into thinking about what the audience would want in this area around principles and purpose and business. So I didn't go into it thinking I've got a bit of an idea. The world is strewn with podcasts that have 17, 19, 23 episodes, and then they kind of run out because it's an idea that has exhausted itself. And I wanted to ensure that right from the outset I did this right. I built a strategy out. I looked at what it was going to look like in a year's time. As I say, things might change along the way, but I had a clear plan for it. And then I really committed my time to deeply researching each of the guests, their backgrounds, what the interesting questions were, what the audience would want to get out of these people, because I've had some really amazing guests on the podcast, and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for me to ask, the questions I want. So it really it's only come from doing it right, working hard on it, not treating it as a marketing tool for the other business or whatever it happens to be, but actually really committing to this as a product, as a service, and not just as a marketing tool to promote other elements of the business. So I went into it not focused on money first, but focusing on producing a really brilliant product. We were lucky in a sense, I guess, not lucky, but you'll see what I mean, that we launched in 2019, 2020, we went into COVID, and we saw lots of businesses that demonstrated the lack of alignment between their words that they had espoused for many years as a brand and their actions when a genuine crisis hit, and all of these, what I call vinyl values that had sat on the walls of some businesses, they really didn't come to fruition when the crisis hit. And then we saw other businesses who really did align their brand and their actions and their words and their actions. So I guess we benefited from people wanting to learn a little bit more at that point about how to authentically deliver purpose in the business, to authentically deliver a new P&L, leadership and principles and leadership, because there was such a disconnect for some brands and some industries between the words they had espoused and the actions they were taking at that time.
Okay, I love it. So you started the podcast. Can you then explain, because you're obviously doing, you right now you're a global keynote speaker and you moderate panels and conferences, and I know you're writing a book, so there's different elements to what you do. What came first, and did one idea follow from another, or kind of how did it expand into the work that you do today?
Obviously the podcast came first, then I launched the Institute, the new P&L Institute, on the back of the podcast in 2021. And that was really to start delivering leadership and culture work, doing research around leadership and culture within business. Some of the audience I'd had on the New P&L podcast had started reaching out to me for consultancy work in that area, so I established the Institute. Then I because I'm, without sounding too much like a dick, I am on a mission to deliver the new P&L globally, so the keynote speaking seemed a sensible vehicle to again expand the the connection with audience, because sometimes podcasting can be quite passive in your relationship between the host and the audience. So I saw keynote speaking as an opportunity to get in front of a few hundred people at a time, really deliver the messages around the new P&L, have deep conversations with them afterwards, sometimes do a bit of consulting. So I started the keynote speaking, and then that grew quite exponentially over the last couple of years. So I thought I'd pull together the book, and the principles of the book, really they've been the things that I've been working on for a decade. Some of the core methodology, if you like, I've had in my mind for 7 or 8 years. In fact, I've talked to you about it in the past, a long time ago. So the book seemed like a natural progression of bringing together the wisdom of all the podcast guests, bringing together all of the research that we're doing through the Institute, bringing together my thinking over nearly a decade in this sort of general area. It seemed like a natural progression to put it all on paper, get it out of my head.
Yeah. So it's all sort of organically grown from once it started with the podcast and then, kind of built out. And I know, and I know that with the keynote speaking, like, again, you started from scratch. Like, you were like, right, okay, I'm gonna go after some speaker slots, starting from zero. And you've built that up in the same way that you did with the podcast, doing the research, targeting the right audience, develop. And I know you've got keynotes on all sorts of different topics.
Yes.
That all relate to this whole idea of principles in leadership and purpose generally, and kind of and creativity runs through an awful lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from all of this, and from the various journeys you've had with the different businesses you've had, like what are the biggest lessons you've learned?
I think to your point about launching the podcast from scratch and the keynote speaking business, for example, and the Institute as well, I think, and it's going to sound a bit self-deprecating, but I think this is true to a point. I think entrepreneurship in a way does rely on being a naive idiot, because it's
brilliant.
It is kind of saying, keynote speaking, yeah, I could do a bit of that, and then just trying to find a way to do it, and it's bloody hard work. There have been no easy entry points into this whole process that I've done. It has been grueling work over the last 5 years. But I think if you thought too much about it, you'd never do some of these things. So being a naive idiot and just saying, yeah, that seems like a good idea, and I'll crack on with it, it gives you it opens the door. It doesn't give you the work. You've got to find that work, and you've got to, do the 12-hour days and the 14, 16-hour days, and you've got to really find it, wade the hard yards financially and everything else, and get doors slammed in your face figuratively and literally time and time again. It doesn't give you the opportunity, but what it does do is open the door, because you just think, well, why not? And if you actually thought about how hard it would be to create a global podcast from scratch, or a research institute, or a keynote speaking career, you just wouldn't do it, because you'd overthink it, and we're all guilty of that. So I think having that naive stupidity is a healthy thing. I think the tenacity, probably a totally underrated virtue in business today. Just because you believe in it, and it's your passion and it's your purpose, and you see the value in it, that's the great part about entrepreneurship. The really hard part about it is convincing everyone else that there's a valid product or service or vision there, and that's the disconnect, I think. We can have a really great idea, we can really believe in it passionately, but we've got to convince everyone else, and that's where the hard work is. So that tenacity to continually push through the really, really hard periods and believe that vision is there. And I'm a firm believer, I know it's a kind of a cliche, but I'm a firm believer that half the time you just succeed because everyone else in that space has given up, and eventually you're the only woman or man left standing, and so it eventually works. But that can take years sometimes, as it is, and it has. But you've just got to totally believe in it. You've got to have that clear vision at right at the long-term vision, but you've got to be prepared to move and pivot and take different roads to get there. But you know where the destination is, but the roads might change over time.
Yeah. I think it's a really important point, actually, because I know this from you, having worked with you and known you for years, that you're actually a very strategic person in the way that you look at things and plan things out. And so, like you said, from the get-go, it wasn't just an idea I'll have a go at. It was an idea that you thought about, you developed out, you looked at the very long term and thought, how am I going to keep this going, and how is it going to sustain itself beyond the initial kind of exciting first flares? And it's that grounds the idea and that keeps you pushing towards it, because you've got a very clear vision, you've got a very clear idea about the destination. Like you said, you're willing to flex and mould dependent on the reaction you get, I guess, and you know, the feedback that you get from the various audiences, but you know where you're heading. And so would you say it's that really holds you firm, like in the and I know, you know, when times are really tough, when the money isn't rolling in, when you're having to invest without an idea about when the return is coming, is it that holds you firm, that just keeps you going?
Yeah, I think so, because, you know, ideas are great, intention is wonderful, but only action delivers. So the only thing we can do, you know, lots of people think, I from some of the conversations I've had, that if an idea is strong enough, it will somehow manifest itself and deliver itself. But it won't. That's only your permission to play. It's only, you know, as I said earlier, the opening of the door. You still have to walk through that door, and only action will deliver. So you've got to have that vision, and you've got to believe that every barrier that comes in your way, and I could sit here for 3 hours with you and tell you all of the mistakes I've made and all of the things I've tried and that didn't quite work, but I took something out of that and tried the next thing, you know, the next kind of commercial initiative for the new P&L podcast or whatever. You just got to keep going and going and going, but critically learning from what you're doing, understanding how that fits into the next concept that you're trying to develop. What are the mistakes I made? What are the learnings I've got? How do I massage them into that next great idea? How do I deliver that idea into action? How does it align with my vision, and how do I keep moving towards it? And, you know, I think when people talk about pivoting in business, I think it's important to pivot, but I only think it's important to pivot if it's in line with your purpose. You've got to question why you're pivoting. If you're pivoting because it's clearly in line with the strategic desire to get towards that vision, then great. If you're pivoting because what you're doing just feels a little too hard, and maybe I'm going to pivot because, you know, this seems like another shiny thing over here I might grab hold of. A month down the line, you're going to be in exactly the same position as you are, because that idea is going to need the hard work and the commitment and the action as well. Yeah. So if you're going to pivot, but pivot with purpose. Pivot for a reason. Yeah.
And I think, you know, from what you've been saying, and I hear this a lot from people who are, you know, in the throes of either setting up their own businesses or they've been running them for a while, that you have to, it's always like you're always reframing failure as feedback.
Yeah,
so that it's like, no matter what doesn't, you know, because you will inevitably try, and I sit in this camp myself, you try an inordinate number of things, and a lot of it, there's tumbleweeds, there's stuff just crashes and burns, nothing happens, you get no response, and it can be really disheartening. And the only thing that can keep you going is going, okay, what did I learn from that? Okay, well, that thing didn't work. Let me take that, twist it this way, and reapply and try it this way. Yep. And almost making, I mean, sometimes I get my clients making games out of it. It's like, okay, we call them acts of productive discomfort.
Yes,
we just go, right, how do we take that and adapt what we're doing and try again and see what we learn from that, and so that it doesn't deter you from keeping on going. Like you said, rather than kind of going, oh, well, that you know, I put something out into the world, nothing happened, it's therefore not going to work, so I shall go and try this over here instead as a completely different thing.
Exactly. And I don't think you don't have to reframe failure as feedback. Failure is feedback. You know, you've put something out there, people have either liked it or they haven't, they either understand it or they don't, they either think it's right or they don't, they either buy it or they don't. Yeah. That's not failure, that's just feedback.
Yeah,
it is feedback.
It's very true, very true. So, how do you feel doing this kind of work? You know, like for all of the ups and downs and the challenges that are inevitable and will continue to be, you know, as things evolve. How do you feel doing it?
I guess I'll answer that by going back to when I was 7 years old. So when I was 7, I grew up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in a town called 𝗘𝗣𝗜𝗦𝗢𝗓, and we had very, very few books. I had a very large family, and we had very few books in our house for various reasons. And when I was 7, I won a second prize in a local newspaper. Some people might have heard of newspapers, thing from the past. I won second prize in a newspaper competition, and I won an encyclopedia. And my mum said that, over the next 2 years, I just devoured that encyclopedia from front to back to front, and it set the tone for my expansive view of the world, for my curiosity, for my creativity, and everything I'm doing now with the new P&L. And I'm in my mid-50s now, but I can trace a direct red line back to the curiosity, the thinking, the expansive worldview that I got from that encyclopedia. So, I've worked in lots of different industries for a long time. What I thought when I set up the new P&L was, actually, I was in the right space. The way I described it to someone the other day was, I've always been standing, for most of my career, I've been standing on the right field, looking the wrong way. And then I turned around with the new P&L and realised I was supposed to be running for that goal line, not the one I'd been staring at. So I was in the right place, but couldn't quite figure out where I was. With the new P&L, I think it is the coming together of everything that I love: the creativity, innovation, knowledge acquisition, curiosity, learning, having conversations with people, deep conversations with people, and learning from them. So it's the best thing I've ever done. It's taken me a hell of a long time to get here, and I think that's perhaps the big, you and I have had conversations for a decade about me running out of time in business to find the idea. This is the irony. And I've done lots of entrepreneurial things in my 35, nearly 40-year career, but it's only in the last 5 years I've found what I'm supposed to be doing. But isn't that a wonderful thing? Because I could have stayed in a job and never found that thing. But just because I've found it doesn't mean it's not brutally hard work. But at least it's brutally hard work pushing in the right direction.
Yeah. And it speaks to that 7-year-old boy that
Absolutely.
your core self, the real you,
Totally.
whose imagination and brain got sparks reading an encyclopedia all those years ago. Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. Well, listen, it's been brilliant having you on the show. Thanks so much for sharing vulnerably your own experience and your learnings and insights. If anyone's interested in learning about the new P&L podcast or hiring you to keynote on the myriad of interesting topics that you cover, or getting you to moderate conferences or panels, where can they find you?
So the podcast, if you type in the new P&L, so P&L, hyphen principles and leadership and business, you'll find us on all of the major podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, and so on. People would like to get in touch with me. Probably the best place is connect with me on LinkedIn, Paul Spiers, Spiers, and just connect with me on LinkedIn and we can have a conversation. And the website's principlesandleadership.com. But that's it. I really appreciate the opportunity, Alison. Thank you so much for having me
honestly,
on the show.
I think it's brilliant, and I think it's provided some real inspiration for anybody who's toying with the idea of either starting their own business or just experimenting with an idea that they've had to see where it goes. So I'll include all your details in the show notes for anybody so that they can find you.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
For listeners, if you know of anyone who would benefit from listening to this conversation and Paul's brilliant story and insights, please do share this episode. And until next time, just know that I believe in you and your ability to get any idea that you have, however old, off the ground and running. So go do your thing.
Thank you for listening today. I hope our time together has got you thinking about your own adventure in happiness. So please do get in touch. I'd love to hear more about your story. And why not join our Dream Chasers Unite community? There is nothing better than an adventure shared. Until next time, be brave and go create what you crave.